Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Emmenduri, and I got a first-time guest on the show today. I would venture to say, though, you are familiar with him. His name is Dr. Dave Janda, currently hosts the Operation Freedom radio show, broadcasts every Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern, and you can listen live, of course, at davejanda.com. I think you're going to get a taste today, though, of the kind of content that he puts out. We're going to have a good discussion about the economy, the markets, the dynamic that's going on in politics right now. And without any further ado, Dr. Janda, thanks for coming on the show.
Ken, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for everything that you do with Crush the Street. One of our regular guests is Trader Steph, actually, on Operation Freedom on our radio show, and she is a very valued guest, and she is a remarkable person, as you know, based on her background and all the work she's doing currently. But what I believe Crush the Street does, and I'm a huge fan of what you do and what your team does, is you not only put information out for folks to empower them and to educate them, and information that they're not going to get from CNBS or Fox Business News or Bloomberg or Reuters, but the analysis behind what you put out, I believe, is second to none. And I thank you for what you do and how you do it. I know you get a lot of grief, all of us do, that put out information that's not propaganda, but based on fact and information that folks need to know, but it might not be what they want to hear. So I thank you for all of your efforts over all the time you put into it and your team.
I really appreciate that, especially coming from you, sir. So enough about me, though. I want to get into your analysis on what's going on in the economy. Trump did a very good job, I'd say, of analyzing the situation, calling the economy a bubble prior to being elected, during the campaign. And, you know, if you recall, he was even on Alex Jones prior to being the president of the United States. And he alluded to the problems that we freely discuss here in the alternative media, unfiltered media. And on election night, he even thanked Alex Jones for the win. I mean, you know, for his contribution, spreading the word. And I'm just curious, you know, pre-election Donald Trump, post-election Donald Trump, you know, what is going on in his mind right now, especially as it pertains to the stock market, which he has fully taken ownership of?
Well, it's a great question, and it's I think it's really very complicated. I wish I could give you a 20-second soundbite, and people could walk away saying, "Okay, well, that seems plausible." I am going to give you a soundbite, but it's going to be a lot longer than 20 seconds. By way of foundation, many folks are saying, wait a minute, this guy is a retired orthopedic surgeon. What does he know about economics? And I understand that mindset of saying, you know, why this guy and what kind of insight does he have? One of my majors in college, I was a double major with chemistry and economics at Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, was in economics. And in my work in medicine, every one of the studies I was involved with, from a healthcare cost containment standpoint, because in addition to my role as an orthopedic surgeon, for the past 32 years, I've been very involved in healthcare policy and healthcare cost containment. That came through my work in prevention. And by way of foundation, just one of our studies, according to the federal government, the CDC, that analyzed our work, of which I was the lead investigator, led to the prevention of 1.7 million people being injured in the United States every year and saved $2 billion in healthcare costs every year. What we did with our studies, which were unique, Ken, is we linked the medicine side with the economic side. So I have a 32-year track record in just medical research focusing on the economic side of the equation. Reagan initially in 1988 had asked me to be involved in healthcare policy, where I worked with C. Everett Koop and several congressmen and a number of domestic policy officials. And it was through that relationship that over time, not that the government listened, Reagan's folks did, because my approach was more free market approach, empower people, not insurance companies, not big pharmaceutical companies, not big medicine like the AMA, but put the finances back in the hands of people. And back then we were talking about something about medical IRAs, which are now become health savings accounts. But there's always been this economic side to what I do. And as I worked in healthcare policy, I got to know a number of people in a number of different departments, including the Treasury Department, and have insight with my contacts, my sources that I bring forward on Operation Freedom and in my platform, davejanda.com, both the public side and the subscription side, with information of people that I bring forward that are behind the curtain in various departments, whether it's the intelligence agencies or FBI or Secret Service or Treasury Department. And in this case, we're discussing the economic situation. You're absolutely right. Donald Trump, before the election, was saying the stock market's a bubble, the economy's a bubble, the labor statistics, the government statistics are bogus, they're fraud. And then he became president, and that discussion, those talking points were pushed aside. And as you mentioned, which is, I believe, very accurate, he took ownership of the stock market. Hey, I'm doing so great. Look what the stock market's doing. Aren't I doing a great job? Look at it. We're up 25%, 30%, which was completely different from how he ran. And the question is, what happened? So I can only present information that I have from people that I have trusted for many years that have provided me information. And here's the information I can provide. And people can take this or they can discount it. And I encourage them to do further research. Going into the election, it was obvious that our country was at least $21 trillion in debt. I think the current figure is 21.5 trillion.
Right.
And in addition to that, there were the unfunded mandates that many people spoke about, which added tens of trillions of dollars more to what we owe, if you will. But I believe after Trump won the election, you remember there was a meeting he had that ended up in the Oval Office with a photo op with him and Obama. And both looked very uneasy. And in particular, Trump looked uneasy, which was very unlike himself. And prior to that, there were these meetings that just didn't involve Obama, but other government officials. You see, I believe at that point, he was confronted with the complete economic reality of where our country was. I think coming into the election, he said, okay, we're 21 trillion in debt. Let's face it. If you look at Donald Trump's background, and not only building businesses, he is actually one of the foremost experts in bankruptcy law and how to handle bankruptcy situations. I believe that's one of the reasons why he's there now. And he, love him or hate him, the truth of the matter is the guy really knows how to handle the bankruptcy situation. In this case, $21 trillion in debt of a country, minimum, you're in a bankrupt situation. And I believe Trump had a plan. I think his plan was, okay, there are several ways we can deal with this deficit. We can try to grow out of it, we can default, or we can hyperinflate the currency. Okay, in other words, drop the price of the dollar so much they create a hyperinflationary environment and essentially whittle our debt down by using funny money down the line to pay for it. And I believe he was in the process of exposing the fraud of our financial system as the campaign rolled out. He now gets elected president and he has this meeting. And I believe he was confronted with figures that were absolutely unimaginable to him. And this is why in that photo op immediately after that meeting, he looked so uneasy. You see, I believe he was confronted with the fact, and this is something that we have brought up, Greg Hunter, who does a great job on his platform, USA Watchdog, and I both have had several guests on who have outlined more financial problems that our government has ever admitted to. And those guests were Catherine Austin Fitts, former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Bush 1 administration, and Dr. Mark Skidmore, who's a phenomenal researcher based at Michigan State University. And they did an analysis, and they found that just between 1998 and 2015, just two departments, the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, there was a missing $21 trillion in what was called unallocated or undocumented adjustments.
Wow.
They confronted the inspector generals of these departments. And first of all of a sudden, the information that they had gleaned through the government resource and their websites all of a sudden went missing. Then it was re-uploaded. And then Catherine Austin Fitts' website, which housed the original information, suffered a huge attack that essentially shut it down for a period of time. Mm. And then they kept pushing these government officials. Oh, wait a minute, 21 trillion. For example, I believe it was with the entire budget of the military was 5 billion, yet in 1 year, yet they were missing 15, or excuse me, the budget was, I think 5 billion for the Army, yet they were missing, I think it was several $1 trillion, far more than they ever would have been allocated. So the question was, well, wait a minute, if Congress allocates this money and there's no extra allocation of money from Congress, where did this come from? I mean, was the Fed just in the basement pushing buttons, creating more and more monetary supply to feed this beast, and nobody was talking about it? And they also asked the question, well, wait a minute, where did it go? These unaccounted adjustments, where did it go? Well, the government kept refusing to address this issue, and then they came out with a PR statement and said, hey, we're gonna do better accounting practices now. Okay. Well, now recently I got something from Mark Skidmore, who has been on Greg's platform and my platform, along with Catherine. And it was from the Inspector General's office of the Department of Defense. And essentially, Mark put to them, are we missing something here? Are we making a mistake? This $21 trillion that's missing, 15 trillion of which is in the Defense Department from 1998 to 2015. Are we missing something here? The response, they never denied that this money was missing. They came back with this redacted document that was about 99% blackened out. Wow. But part of it is they were changing their accounting practices to adjust for this missing money, to say that it's now under the national security classified, if you will, documentation. And because of that, they don't have to adhere to standard accounting practices. Now, wow. Now that's concerning. So in other words, and those were just two departments, remember, over 17 years, 1998 to 2015. We don't know about all the other departments. And you see, I believe at this meeting, Trump was confronted. I think Trump had a plan about, okay, we're 21 trillion. Here, we're going to try to grow out of this to a certain extent. We can't grow out of all of it, but part of this we're going to grow out of by cutting regulations, cutting taxes, bringing manufacturing base back to the United States, reinvigorating the United States economy. We're going to grow a portion of that debt down. And then what we're going to do is just as he suggested with Puerto Rico, right, when they were having problems, we're going to potentially default on a part of this debt. And maybe what we're going to do is we're going to talk strong dollar, but what we're going to do is we're going to bring that dollar down. And in so doing, we're going to create a bit of a controlled, if that's possible, controlled hyperinflationary environment so that we're paying back this debt in funny money dollars, essentially. But I believe after that meeting, and he was given the numbers of not just the 21 trillion that we admit to it being in debt, not just the unfunded liabilities over time, But by the way, it's not just this 21 trillion that Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Jones have identified in 2 departments over 17 years. Actually, here it is from all the departments. And I believe when he was confronted with that, I believe he realized, wait a minute, we can't grow out of this. We can't, I mean, if we're going to default, it's going to be not just a minor event. We just can't have a controlled default. It's going to have to be a across the board default. We're going to have to hyperinflate the dollar, the currency supply to such a level that it's going to be almost a Weimar Germany type of situation. So what I believe Trump decided at that point is, look, I'm going to bring some of these bad actors into the administration and essentially hold them hostage. Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross, Gary Cohn. And I'm going to bring these dudes onto the ship of the SS Financial Titanic and say, boys, you're not getting off this ship because you created this problem, and you're going to be on this ship and you're going to help me solve this problem. And we're going to try to make it so that as very few people in the American population are harmed by what you have done over many decades' time with your globalist syndicate. And I believe that's why Mnuchin was there and is there, and Wilbur Ross was there and is there, because they know where the bodies are buried. They know where the system can be reinvigorated and where it can be, if you will, where the foundation can be shored up. And I believe what he did by talking about this, I believe he used the tools that they had been using for decades of this stock market continually marching higher and the bond market being stable. I think he utilized these globalist players, the Rosses, the Cohens, the Mnuchins, and a number of others, and said, okay, you're going to use your magic wand. Remember, Obama kept talking about the magic wand. Well, I believe he said to these guys, yeah, you have a magic wand. It's fraudulent, but you have the magic wand to make this appear one thing rather than what reality is. You're going to use that magic wand in overdrive. And what we're going to do is we're going to buy some time, and we're going to be able to try to set the foundation a bit more solid so that as this financial reset occurs, what's going to happen is as few people as possible are going to be negatively impacted. And I believe that's where we are now. And I believe what it's done is it's bought him time so that he could help shore up that system underneath, behind the curtain. He fully knows the system's coming down. And we know that because what did he start to do recently, Ken? He started to point where the finger needs to be pointed, and that's at the Fed, right? I mean, just in the past couple of weeks, Trump blames Powell, the head of the Fed, right? Quote, I think the Fed has gone crazy. Quote, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy. Then he comes back with, quote, my biggest threat is the Fed, says Trump. Quote, my biggest threat is the Fed, Trump said during an interview. Quote, because the Fed is raising rates too fast and it's too independent, end quote. Now, too independent. When's the last time, Ken, you heard a president of the United States refer to the Fed as being independent? Ken, your viewers, your listeners, your readers, they're very knowledgeable. They realize that the Fed is not part of the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judicial branch of the United States government. It's a group of independent bankers that is solely focused not on the welfare of the United States, not on the welfare of the United States economy, not on the welfare of American citizens. It's based on the welfare of the banking institutions that comprise the members of the Fed. That's all. It's bankers helping bankers, or in Dave Janda's world, banksters helping banksters. And we all know this started in a great book. I know you're very well aware of it. A book that I recommend. I believe every kid in high school, it should be mandatory reading, The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, that outlines how the creature, being the Fed, how the creature, the Fed, was created in 1913 by the globalist syndicate, passed into law late in the night on Christmas Eve in December of 1913. And with that act, the money supply of the United States was handed over to, however you want to call it, the globalist syndicate, the criminal international banking syndicate, the deep state, however you want to paint it. But that's where our country, that is, I believe, one of the hallmarks of when our country really started on this downward slippery slope. So he identifies the Fed as being independent. Now notice the bought off lamestream fake media never touched his statement. And the reason is because they be calling attention to the fact. And remember, the bought off lamestream fake media, whether it's CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Fox for that matter, they're really all they're a tentacle of the globalist syndicate. They are a propaganda arm. They are not an information-based arm like Crush the Street is, or what we try to do at davejanda.com, or with the radio show Operation Freedom. Their goal is to misinform, disinform, and hopefully keep people so uninformed that they can't make a reasonable assessment of what's happening now, in the past, or in future events to come.
Yeah.
So Trump points the finger at the Fed. Now, usually the Fed goes hand in hand. I don't care if you're looking at the, Bush 1 administration, Clinton administration, Bush 2 administration, Obama administration, they work hand in hand. And now Trump calls them his biggest threat, and he calls them, they're just too independent. But then he escalated the attacks this past week. And he said, quote, every time we do something great, Powell and the Fed raises interest rates. Trump, this is from Zero Hedge. Trump once again unleashed on the Federal Reserve and its chairman, Jerome Powell, during a 30-minute Oval Office interview. He blamed the central bank for market chaos that erupted over the past couple of weeks, ignoring the pleas of his closest advisors. Might that be Mnuchin and Ross? Yeah. And practically every financial professional in the United States. The president stepped up his attacks on Powell, telling the Chronicle of American Capitalism that it's, quote, too early to tell if he regrets nominating the Fed chairman. Pressed about what he believes is the biggest threat to the United States economy, Trump replied, quote, the Fed, end quote. You see, and the reason why I believe that's significant is because Trump is now telling you he's gotten behind the curtain. He must have gotten the foundation a bit more secure because he knows the system is rigged to blow. And now what he's doing, he's pointing the finger where it needs to be pointed, rightfully so. But he's also pointing the finger because I believe by him making this statement, I believe that Trump is acknowledging we're kind of at the end of the road here when it comes to the smoke and mirrors. And now comes some reality. And I believe his goal has always been to get the reality to hit about what's going to happen financially after the midterms.
Wow.
And I believe that, and I believe that's where we are. And Powell, the same guy that he's pointing the finger at, go back to February 27th of this year, 2018. Powell went in front of Congress. And here's what he said, quote, the United States is not on a sustainable financial path, end quote.
Dr. Janda, what a powerful analysis. And if anybody just listened to that portion right there, I think they'd walk away with a tremendous amount of insight and analysis on just, how to make sense of what is going on and the dynamics of, how the markets are reacting, juxtaposed against how the president is dealing with this situation. And from what I got from what you said is Trump, in a sense, is very calculated. And it's a very interesting thing because, being a successful president, it might have a conflict of interest with what is best for the country or the American people, because you might not be able to be president if you don't appeal to, large masses of people, which might not be in the interest of the economy, the long-term longevity of the country. And, obviously being in line with the globalists too. I mean, there's just so many moving parts to being able to move this along. And I think what I heard and my own analysis of this is that Trump is calculating all these variables all at once and attempting to do what's best for the people, hopefully, right? But, I'll point this out. He blames the Fed for the bad, but then even, as early as this week, he points to strong earnings of companies for why stocks are up once again. So I'll let you continue here. How calculated is Trump? And, is it fair to take credit for the good and then deflect the bad?
Well, I think that's part of his game plan. You see, I think as far as calculating, I can give you some personal experience. My dad was in the construction industry in Chicago. He built big buildings. And he had some interactions with Trump. Now, granted, this is 30 years ago. After my dad had several meetings with Trump, he made the following statement. My dad was a really tough guy in business. And he said, it's interesting, Trump in public is very different than Trump in private. What he said is the guy who tends to be very boisterous in public, in private, is very different in a sense that he takes in all information. He lets everyone else speak and present information. And he said the best thing about Trump is when you present him information that is not something that he wants to hear. He synthesizes it. He doesn't dismiss it. And then what he does is while you're in the room, he tries to formulate a plan in how to take a negative situation and make it positive. The other thing he said about Trump was that he was always very impressed with the people that surrounded Trump. He said they were not yes people. He said they were people that would actually challenge their boss on issues to try to get to a better outcome. So everybody would think about an issue more analytically. There would always be someone playing devil's advocate in the room. At least that was my dad's experience. He also said the people that surrounded Trump were honest and hardworking people that were very analytical. And he felt the best people he had ever dealt with on another team other than his own team. So that's 30 years ago. Now, could Trump have changed in that 30 years? Possibly. But in that 30 years, Trump became even more successful than he was 30 years ago. So I take that piece of information and I add it to something that you brought up about people that have occupied the Oval Office. My first experience dealing with policy issues with people in the Oval Office was with Ronald Reagan. In 1988, he saw research I had been involved with, invited me to work with C. Everett Koop on healthcare policy. And this is by way of example. Koop presented information based on what our team had come up with that would empower people through free market reforms. And such as medical IRAs, now saw health savings accounts, insurance companies competing rather than colluding, price transparency, high risk pools for folks on pre-existing conditions, being able to sell insurance across state lines, again, enhancing competition of the insurance companies rather than the collusion that occurs, bringing medications in that generic-wise that would drop the price of pharmaceutical products. He presented this to President Reagan and said, look, Mr. President, this program that we're presenting to you is going to upset big pharmaceutical companies, big insurance companies, big medicine, the AMA, but it's going to benefit every American. And Reagan said, good, I don't care about those other entities. Do what's right for people. Now, I was brought in at the very end of Reagan's administration working with Koop. When Bush 1 came into power, the same information was passed on to him. And his response was, well, I don't want to upset big pharmaceutical companies, big insurance companies, big medicine. They fund a lot of what we do. No. So all of our efforts on free market reform, and this is one of the things that's so frustrating, issues that we presented back in 1988 to President Reagan are now tentatively being discussed 30 years later in 2018 with healthcare reform. But Bush 1 had that philosophy. Everything was shoved to the background. When Clinton came in, again, the same approach was put in front of him, and his response was similar to Bush 1's. Well, we don't want to make those people mad. Are you kidding? They help us big time. And when Bush 2 came in, the same approach was, and his response was the same. And Obama, forget about it, because it was all about a government-run healthcare system. So one of the first statements I made when I went on air in October of 2010, 8 years ago, I said, the day Ronald Reagan left office, our country forever changed, because every person, as far as I'm concerned, based on my experience, every person that's occupied that office has been owned and operated by a criminal syndicate, that criminal syndicate being the criminal international banking syndicate, New World Order crowd, what is also called the deep state, end quote. Now, when I said that, Ken, 8 years ago, the station was inundated with phone calls about, this guy's a conspiracy theorist. He's talking about something called the deep state and the New World Order and a globalist syndicate, criminal international bank. This guy is off his rocker. Okay, well, okay. It's interesting. Those same people that called 8 years ago then started to call back 2 or 3 months later after I was bringing guests on that were from behind the curtain talking about what was going to be happening, and it was happening. They say, we thought this guy was kind of off and some of his guests were off, but, there's something to this. And the point, Ken, goes back to something that you raised, is that many of these people that occupy these high levels of power, not just the president, but leaders in Congress, most of people in all these agencies, and there are good people in these agencies that are patriots, but a lot of the people that are at the very top of the pyramid in each one of these departments and in government and in Congress, they, I believe, have more deference to the globalist syndicate than they do to the American population. And that is how we have gotten in this mess. And that is what Trump has characterized as the swamp. I don't quite agree with the swamp characterization. I think it's more of a septic tank based on the interactions I've had with people in Washington. The swamp implies that there's some viability in the system. In many respects, it's a septic tank because there is very little, if any, viability in the system because of all this stuff floating around that is harmful to every person that values freedom and liberty.
Dr. Janda, let me jump in right there. So I'll ask you this then. Being that Trump has big visions, I mean, historic tax cuts, deregulation, how much fundamental good would you say is taking place right now, despite all of the manipulation, the bubble that he's dealing with? How much fundamental good is taking place? And is there hope in the sense that he can attract more capital to backfill this bubble from overseas, of course, at the expense of other countries, for the good of, here in the U.S., to attract capital from overseas to backfill this bubble? Is there hope in that sense, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's hope on many fronts. I truly believe that if you look at what's happened with regulations, and granted more regulations need to be cut, but regulations have been cut. If you look at what Trump has done with many of these globalist policies, whether it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership or many of these other treaties, he's signed them off. That was a huge blow to the globalist syndicate because that was a huge windfall for the globalist syndicate, just the TPP alone. So the fact that he's backed off many of these globalist plans to further harm the economy of our country, because remember, the globalist system is intent on taking down the United States system because they see us as the speed bump to their New World Order and their one world government. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but I believe it's actually very accurate. And a very good writer in the New American Magazine, Alex Newman, I encourage everyone to go to, I believe their website is newamerican.com. Alex Newman is, I believe, one of the best analysts when it comes to the globalist syndicate. Phenomenal. And he has actually pointed this out in a number of different pieces, manuscripts that he has written and that the New American has featured. And so I believe that Trump is behind the scenes trying to take down a number of these globalist pillars that have been erected over many years' time, many decades' time. And many people aren't seeing that happen. And the reason is because if they saw it in broad daylight about what he was doing and what his emissaries were doing, I believe it would create fear. And let's face it, a lot of any economy and a lot of our perceptions are based on of how we feel things are going. And if we see a dismantling of the system that's occurred over a number of decades' time, even though it's good overall for the longevity for freedom and liberty and economic prosperity, I believe many people would become spooked by that. And becoming spooked, I believe, could lead to a meltdown in a very quick time period. So as far as hope is concerned, we have to make sure that the hope we have is based on a solid foundation and isn't based on vapor or what I call hopium. Because the worst thing we can do is fabricate false hope.
Right.
I think people need to realize there are some tough times ahead. Do I believe there's a financial reset in the cards? I don't see how you can't get through the type of debt we have, the type of added debt I believe that was presented to Trump that we have. I don't see how we get through that without some type of a financial reset occurring and there being some tough days, weeks, several months as we work through that process. But I think what Trump and the people behind the curtain that he works with are trying to do when it comes to the economy is to take that time period that could well have been if Hillary Clinton was elected, a globalist, take that time period that would have stretched years, if not decades, and he's trying to compress it as far as he can to push that accordion in until he gets it as tight as he can, and then says, okay, folks, it's not only the Fed. Yes, the Fed is a big problem, but there are other players that are a problem. And one of the things that I know Alex Newman has talked about, and I agree with him, is one of the things that's needed is one night Trump comes on every station and says, okay, folks, the first hour is what this country is all about and what our foundation is. And the second hour is here are the perpetrators that over a number of decades' time have tried to destroy this country and everything that it was built upon. And this is how it's harmed you. Now, we have a plan. We've been working on this plan since before I took office. And here are the steps that we have taken. And here are the steps we have to take. You see, I believe the best thing that Trump can do is treat every American as though they're an adult and present, just go back 30 years with Ben Janda. Present information that people need to know. And it might not be what they want to hear. But to get to that point, Ken, you have to bring people along. You have to bring people along so that they trust you and the people around you.
Right.
And I believe that's what he's in the process of doing. And, you know, we have a midterm election coming up. And I believe that's an important event. And you know, every time you go through an election, this is the most important election we're ever going to have. I get it. We're sick and tired of hearing that. Although I do think the 2016 election was very important because, and I don't come at this on a right-left thing. And that's why I call the show Operation Freedom. And it's based on something, the first thing actually I was taught when I went to Washington under Reagan. he had his administrative assistants speak to anyone who came there and said, look, you need to know the boss's philosophy. And here's the boss's philosophy. This right-left axis is fake. It's theater. It's meant to divide and conquer. It's meant to have people at each other's throats to distract them about what's really going on. And what's really going on is the up-down axis, up being freedom and down being oppression. There is a group of people, and they didn't identify back then as the deep state or the globalist syndicate or the New World Order. They just said there is a group of people, high-ranking people around the world, that work the up-down axis. And their goal is to strip freedom from every person of the world and oppress as many people of the world, because out of working that axis, this sinister group of people get more power, more control, and more financial resources. So your goal when you work on a policy, your goal is not right-left. Right. Your goal is to work the up-down axis, and you have to push on whatever it takes to raise that axis to as high as it can in the freedom direction. Okay, so that's how I run my radio show. I go after, and my platform, davejanda.com, both the free side and the subscription side, we unearth information that takes on the right and the left who are involved with the syndicate, that are working the right-left axis, if you will, as a means of keep putting people at each other's throats, and in the meanwhile are actually trying to strip freedom from people by keeping them misinformed, disinformed, uninformed. So bottom line is that I believe Trump is also working that freedom oppression axis. I believe he's very well connected around the world with like-minded individuals. And this is what's driving the deep state nuts. This is why we see this unending pounding on him. You know, when you just look at this past week, there was this nut job, who went into a synagogue where people were practicing, were worshiping. And he walked in there and he massacred these poor innocent people. Well, immediately, and this guy expressed hatred for the Jewish faith and also Donald Trump. I mean, this guy, in his writings, in his dealings, terrible hatred toward Trump and the Jewish faith. Yet, what did the mainstream media jump on? That it was all Trump's fault. Trump's fault because he created this atmosphere of conflict. Well, wait a minute. Tell me if, Ken, globalists thrive on chaos. They thrive on conflict. They thrive on supporting both ends of the thing to drive each other into each other so that it creates chaos, and out of it they get more power, control, and financial resources. But my goodness, prior to this event, did we not have Hillary Clinton saying about civility that if we don't win, essentially, we're going to beat the hell out of you if we don't win?
Yeah.
I mean, did we not have Cory Booker yelling at people that they need to get in people in Congress's face? Did we not have Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the United States, under Obama, say when they go low, we need to kick them? Did we not have Nancy Pelosi say, those of us who are against us in policy, well, when we win, they're going to be collateral damage? Yeah. Did we not have Steve Scalise get shot on a field along with a number of other congressmen, and the guy who shot him was a Bernie Sanders supporter screaming, "I don't want you to take away Obamacare"? I mean, this is a two-way street. And the people that promote, I believe, violence are essentially emissaries of the globalist syndicate, because the globalist syndicate does not want people to get along. They don't want people of divergent minds to get together and talk about their differences. No. They don't, I have been in meetings in Washington in a big White House where the term useless eaters is used. Globalists think of all of us, the 99.9% of us. They think of us, they speak of us as being, quote, useless eaters, that we are utilizing the resources that were really meant for them and their families. And this is what we're up against. And Sun Tzu used to say, you not only have to know yourself, which is really important, but you have to know your enemy if you're going to be victorious. And this is where I go back to what I suggested about Trump after the midterms having this several-hour event on television and radio, and where he says, know ourselves. This is our past. This is our history. This is the Constitution. This is the Declaration of Independence. This is the Bill of Rights. Know who we are. And then know our enemy. And then these are the people who have tried to strip you and your friends and your family and all of your relatives over the past 100-some years of your freedoms and liberties. Here's your enemy. And now, here is what we have done to try to stymie the enemy. And here is what we have to do to make your future based on the pillars of freedom and liberty. That's why I say that is the key, I believe, for him to do after the midterms. And that you mentioned hope, that I believe gives everyone hope, not hopium, but gives everybody hope for a secure, safe future.
Well, I gotta say, I'm very appreciative of someone like yourself who's out there educating people, because unfortunately, with the way politics are and the way, people get elected into office, it's appeasing a very uninformed population in so many instances. It's levels of discussion that really aren't that important to be discussing in many instances. And unfortunately, this is how we have to discuss these things to, have someone elected, or, the Democrats, the Republicans, and you're really dissecting and analyzing things. But you have to get to that point. You have to put the effort in to learn about it and to be informed and to look at the facts. And then you're obviously much more informed to make a better decision going forward. But it's a little bit frustrating, because I know a lot of people out there aren't putting the time in to get to that level of thought and analysis that you are bringing to the table. But I'm glad you're out there researching and sharing this knowledge with so many people. So I just want to give you an opportunity here, Dr. Janda, to share some closing thoughts, and of course, share some information if people were to visit your website, what they can expect to find, and how they can follow you.
I think the key is for folks to, and I thank you for those kind words, Ken. I think the key is for folks to remain engaged with sources of information outside of the bought-off lamestream fake media. Our population has been propagandized with misinformation, disinformation for decades. We have to give credit to the deep state, to the globalist syndicate. They took control of the means of communication decades ago. And they have used propaganda to virtually make a significant percentage of our population not just misinformed, not just disinformed, but propagandized to a level that they have no longer become analytical of information presented to them. And whether it's information you present or I present or anyone presents, people need to research it. People need to look at sources. People need to look at information presented, and if that information actually comes to pass. So one of the most important things I can pass on to your viewers, our listeners, is folks have to remain analytical and they have to remain critical, and they need to keep their means of information open. This is why what you do at Crush the Street is so important. This is why what we try to do at Operation Freedom with the radio show and platform, DaveJanda.com, we hope benefits people by providing them information that they're not going to get from the bought off lamestream fake media. Yeah, the discussion you and I have had will never occur in this day and age on any network TV or radio show, syndicated radio show, period. It won't occur because the globalist syndicate owns everyone, and this includes Fox. Granted, there's some controlled opposition there, but it's still controlled. And this is why that when you have a tentacle of the deep state, that being what some people still refer as the mainstream media, which I call the lamestream media, this is why it is so important for folks to stay connected to alternative sources of information. And not that they shouldn't research it, not that they shouldn't analyze it. They need to do that, no matter where they're getting their information. But that's the single greatest point I can leave with our viewers and listeners. Stay connected to alternative means of information. Analyze, research. This is the key for our country. And many people say, well, I'm one person, I can't make a difference. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. When our country was involved in the American Revolution, many people, if we went out, Ken, right outside my window in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Michigan, if I went out that window and asked 100 people, what percentage of the American population was involved in the American Revolution that led to our independence? They would probably say 95 to 99% of the people were against if they even knew it was Britain, against the British monarchy. The truth of the matter is significantly less than 20%. Some people say as small as 5% of the American population were the patriots that led to the independence of our country. One person can make a difference. If every person that listens to this interview takes the download from this and brings it to one relative, one neighbor, one coworker, one friend, says, look, these guys had this discussion. You don't have to believe it, but try to research some of the stuff that they were talking about. We need to open they're not dumb. We need to open people's minds to what's really occurring, because once they start to open their eyes, they're no longer zombies to the deep state. They truly become enlightened, and they truly become critical thinkers of what's being pushed at them and down their throat. And that is how we win this battle, this war for our freedom. Wow. Folks can come to DaveJanda.com. We have our radio show. Folks can stream. It's a live show every Sunday, 2 to 5 Eastern. They can go to DaveJanda.com and hit the listen live button in the upper right-hand corner. They can listen live. On the DaveJanda.com, we also have a tremendous amount of free information that we upload on a regular basis. I have a YouTube channel, Operation Freedom. Folks can subscribe to that. That's obviously free. And then we have our subscription side at DaveJanda.com, which is 30 cents a day, $9 a month. Folks don't have to sign up for a year. They can sign up for a month. If they don't like it, $9, they can get rid of it. It's less than a Costco pizza. It's a good deal. We have the podcast to the show for our subscribers if they can't make the Sunday show. We have my WTF show where I take information from my sources and bring it forward in that show. And we have our Insider Insight show where we do a video interview of a leader, of somebody behind the curtain fighting for people's freedom that you're not going to see in the bought-off lamestream fake media. We have a Department of Advanced Research show, which is hosted by Nick Ruiz, who focuses on the IT side of things, of what's really occurring and what people can do to enhance their lives from a tech standpoint. We have all of our archives from the radio show for the past 8 years. We have the archives from the Insider Insight show. So we have a lot of different information. So some folks say, I don't want to subscribe. No problem. We got free stuff. But if folks are interested in what we do, DaveJanda.com. And again, I encourage folks, I'm not saying this because you're a friend and we're doing an interview today, but one of the first sites I go to on a daily basis is Crush the Street. For two reasons: the information you provide and the analysis you provide. And as I said, one of the most valued guests we have at Operation Freedom and on the DaveJanda.com platform is Trader Steph. Now, and she's very interesting, not just with her background, but Steph will tell you what you need to know, and it might not be what you want to hear.
Well, I totally agree with that. We love Steph here at Crush the Street, and she's one of our most valued contributors. That is for sure. But Dave Janda, I greatly appreciate your time here at Crush the Street. Really one of those hard-hitting interviews that we've had in quite a long time. I mean, at certain times I was feeling emotional, as you were talking. So again, thank you so much for coming on Crush the Street and breaking down, what is going on today in our markets and politics as it relates. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken, for everything you have done and everything you're doing and everything you will do. You're an incredible person.